It began like any other taping day until everything stopped. Steve Harvey had been in the middle of his usual pre-show warm-up, joking with the audience, getting them energized for another episode of Family Feud. The studio buzzed with that familiar electric anticipation, cameras positioned at their marks, lighting technicians making final adjustments, production assistants moving through the space with practiced efficiency. Just another Wednesday afternoon in a career built on thousands of Wednesday afternoons, each one blending into the next in a rhythm so familiar it had become muscle memory. Then a young girl raised her hand during the audience Q&A. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, sitting in the third row with her 2 younger brothers on either side of her and their mother behind them, her hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. Steve had pointed to her with his trademark smile, expecting the usual questions kids asked. Could they be on the show? Did he know any celebrities? What was his favorite color? Mr. Harvey, the girl said, and her voice carried a gravity that didn't match her age, a seriousness that made Steve's smile falter slightly, made him pay attention in a different way. We watch you with Dad every night. 7 words, simple, present tense. We watch you with Dad every night. Steve's face changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in that subtle way that happens when someone hears something beneath the words, catches the weight, hiding in ordinary grammar. But Steve Harvey stood very still, his microphone lowering slightly, his eyes locked on this small girl with the serious face and the present tense statement that somehow sounded like both a confession and a prayer. You watch me with your dad, he repeated slowly. And it wasn't really a question, more like he was testing the words, trying to understand what they were really saying. The girl nodded. Her brothers beside her had gone quiet too, their small faces suddenly solemn. Their mother's hand had tightened on her daughter's shoulder, and if you looked closely, if the cameras had been focused there, which they soon would be, you could see that her eyes were already filling with tears. The studio began to sense it then, that shift in atmosphere that happens when something real is about to break through the performance of entertainment. The chatter died down. People leaned forward. And Steve Harvey, who'd spent 43 years learning how to read a room, how to feel the emotional temperature of a space, knew with absolute certainty that whatever this child was about to say would change everything. To understand what was about to happen in that studio, you have to go back 8 months, to a hospital room in Detroit, where Thomas Carter lay in a bed that had been moved into the living room of his family's small house, because he could no longer climb the stairs to his bedroom. ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, had been stealing his body piece by piece for 2 years, taking his ability to walk, then to use his hands, then to speak clearly, leaving him trapped in a mind that worked perfectly inside a body that no longer obeyed his commands. Thomas had been a construction worker, a man who'd built his life with his hands, who'd taught his 3 children, Sophia, 9, Marcus, 7, and little Jamie, 5, that hard work and laughter were the 2 things you could always count on. He'd coached their soccer teams, built them a treehouse in the backyard, carried them on his shoulders through crowds so they could see over everyone's heads. He'd been strong in the way fathers are strong, in the way children believe their fathers will always be strong, invincible against time and illness and the fragility of human bodies. But ALS doesn't care about strength. It takes everyone eventually. And it had been taking Thomas with a cruelty that felt personal, that felt designed to strip away everything he'd used to define himself as a man, as a father, as a provider. His wife, Jennifer, had quit her job to care for him full-time, navigating insurance claims and medical equipment, and the impossible mathematics of keeping a family afloat when the primary income had disappeared and the medical bills kept mounting. She'd learned to operate feeding tubes and breathing machines, had transformed their living room into a makeshift hospital room, had become nurse and caregiver and the sole functioning parent to 3 children who were watching their father disappear in slow motion. The hardest part wasn't the physical care. It was watching Thomas lose his ability to be the dad he'd always been, unable to toss a baseball, unable to help with homework because his hands wouldn't hold a pencil, unable to read bedtime stories because his voice had become too weak and garbled to make the words clear, unable to be present in all the ways he'd once been present, even though his mind remained sharp, trapped behind the prison of his failing body. Family Feud had become their ritual. Every night at 7 o'clock, Jennifer would position Thomas's bed so he could see the television, and the children would pile onto the couch beside him, close enough that he could feel their warmth even if he couldn't hold them anymore. They'd watch Steve Harvey make people laugh, watch families compete and celebrate and sometimes cry, and for 30 minutes, they could pretend they were a normal family doing a normal thing, not a family in crisis trying to find moments of lightness in the gathering dark. Thomas couldn't speak much anymore. But when Steve Harvey made a joke, Jennifer could see it in her husband's eyes, that flash of humor, that spark of the man he'd been. And the children, who were too young to fully understand what ALS meant, but old enough to know their father was leaving them, would lean against his bed and laugh at the show. And in those moments, they were still a family. Still whole, in the only way they had left. When the Make-A-Wish Foundation had reached out, they worked with adults too, not just children, through a partner organization, and asked Thomas what he wanted. Jennifer had expected him to say he wanted to see his children graduate, or to walk his daughter down the aisle someday. Impossible things that the disease had already stolen. But Thomas had labored to speak through his communication device, selecting letters with the last movements his fingers could still manage, and the message that appeared was simple: studio audience. Family Feud. Meet Steve Harvey. Let kids thank him. Thank him for what? Jennifer had asked, not understanding. Thomas's eyes had filled with tears as he slowly typed, "For making me feel like a dad again." And so here they were, in the third row of a television studio, 3 children and their mother, and a secret they carried together, that this wasn't just a fun trip to see a TV show, that this was something closer to a pilgrimage, a final gift, a way to say thank you to a man who'd unknowingly been keeping their father present in the only way he still could be. Sophia had wanted to be the one to speak. She was the oldest, the one who remembered most clearly what her father had been like before, the one who sometimes caught her mother crying in the bathroom and pretended not to notice. She'd practiced what she wanted to say, had written it down and memorized it, but now, sitting in this bright studio with Steve Harvey looking at her with those kind eyes, she found that the rehearsed words had disappeared, leaving only the truth. "We watch you with Dad every night," Sophia repeated, and her voice was steadier now, as if saying it once had given her courage to continue. "Every night at 7 o'clock. It's the only time he still smiles." Steve's microphone had lowered completely now, hanging forgotten at his side. He took a step closer to the edge of the stage, toward the third row where this small family sat, and something in his posture had changed, the entertainer receding, the human being emerging. "Baby," he said, and his voice had dropped to that gentle register he used when he sensed fragility, when he understood that whatever was coming needed to be handled with care. "Tell me about your dad." The studio had gone quiet. The production assistants who'd been moving through the aisles had stopped. The camera operators, who'd been adjusting their equipment, had gone still. Even the audience members who'd been checking their phones or whispering to neighbors had fallen silent, sensing that something important was happening, something that required their full attention. Sophia looked back at her mother, who nodded encouragement even as tears began streaming down her face. Then she looked at her brothers, Marcus, who was gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles had gone white, and little Jamie, who didn't fully understand what was happening but knew enough to be quiet, to let his sister speak. "His name is Thomas Carter," Sophia said, and speaking her father's name seemed to steady her further. "He has ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. It's making his body stop working, but his brain still works perfectly. He can't walk anymore. He can't use his hands. He can barely talk. But he can still watch TV, and every night we watch your show with him." The words landed in the studio, like stones dropped into still water, each one creating ripples that spread outward, touching everyone, changing everything. Steve's face had transformed, all the professional polish stripped away, leaving only raw recognition, the particular expression that crosses a person's face when they suddenly understand they've been part of something sacred without knowing it. "How long has he been sick?" Steve asked, and his voice was barely above a whisper now, thick with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. 2 years, Sophia answered. "But it got really bad about 8 months ago. That's when he had to stop working. That's when we had to move his bed into the living room because he couldn't climb the stairs anymore." A sob rippled through the audience, not from one person but from several at once, this collective release of grief for a man they'd never met, for a family they were only now learning about, for the particular cruelty of a disease that takes everything slowly, piece by piece, leaving the mind intact to witness its own body's betrayal. Steve had moved down from the stage now, walking up the aisle toward the third row, and the cameras followed him, understanding instinctively that this moment needed to be captured, that whatever was about to happen mattered more than any rehearsed segment or planned joke. When he reached their row, he knelt down in the aisle beside Sophia's seat, bringing himself to her eye level, and the gesture was so gentle, so deliberately non-threatening, that it broke something open in the studio's atmosphere. "Your daddy watches my show every night," Steve said, and it wasn't a question, just a confirmation, a way of honoring what she'd told him by repeating it back, making it real, making it witnessed. "He can't do much else," Sophia said, and there was no self-pity in her voice, just honesty. "He can't play with us anymore. He can't help with homework. He can't read us stories because his voice doesn't work right. But he can still laugh. We can see it in his eyes, even if he can't make the sound anymore. And when we watch your show, when you make jokes, and the families hug each other and everyone's happy, we can see him smile, not with his mouth that doesn't work anymore, but with his eyes. And for 30 minutes, he's still our dad. He's still there with us." Steve's eyes had filled with tears, and one spilled over, tracking down his cheek unchecked. His hand had come up to cover his mouth, and his shoulders shook slightly with the effort of holding himself together. The audience was openly weeping now, strangers dabbing at their eyes with tissues that seemed to materialize from nowhere, people in the back rows standing on tiptoes to see better. To bear witness to this moment that had nothing to do with entertainment and everything to do with the most fundamental truth of human existence, that we're all trying to hold on to the people we love, trying to find ways to stay connected, even when disease and death and the fragility of bodies threaten to pull us apart. "Where is he now?" Steve asked, and there was something urgent in the question, something that suggested he already knew the answer but needed to hear it confirmed. "He's at home," Jennifer said, speaking for the first time, her voice breaking over the words. "He's too sick to travel. The medical equipment, the breathing support, we couldn't bring him. But he's watching. Right now, on the TV in our living room. He knows we're here. He knows Sophia wanted to talk to you." Steve turned to look at the cameras then, and in his eyes was a kind of desperate hope, a need to connect across the distance between this studio and that living room in Detroit, where a man lay dying but still capable of seeing, still capable of knowing that his children were here, that they were trying to thank the person who'd given him back a piece of his fatherhood when everything else had been taken. "Thomas," Steve said, speaking directly to the camera, his voice strong despite the tears, "if you're watching right now, I need you to know something. I had no idea. I had no idea that our show, that me trying to make people laugh, me being silly and making jokes, I had no idea it was doing something important for you and your family." He paused, collecting himself, and the studio was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the cameras, the whisper of the ventilation, the collective breathing of 300 people who'd forgotten they'd come here, expecting to be entertained, and were instead being given something far more valuable, a reminder of what actually matters. "Your babies are here," Steve continued, still speaking to the camera, to Thomas, to a man he'd never met but felt he knew intimately now. "And they're beautiful and brave, and they love you so much. Sophia just told me that watching our show is the time you still get to be their dad. That's..." His voice broke completely, and he had to stop, had to press his fist against his mouth and breathe through the overwhelming emotion. Marcus had started crying now too, and little Jamie, not fully understanding but responding to the emotional weight in the room, had buried his face in his mother's side. Jennifer had her arms around both boys, her face wet with tears, and Sophia sat very straight in her seat, her hands folded in her lap, her face serious and sad and somehow peaceful, as if finally speaking this truth aloud had lightened a burden she'd been carrying alone. Steve turned back to Sophia, and when he spoke, his words came slowly, carefully, weighted with the kind of promise that transcends television, that becomes something more like covenant. "I'm going to make sure your dad knows," he said, "that he's not just watching the show. He's part of it. He's always been part of it. Every family that comes here, every person who plays the game, they're all part of a bigger family. And your dad, Thomas Carter, he's family now too." He looked up at Jennifer. "Ma'am, with your permission," I'd like to do something. I'd like to talk to your husband. Not now. Not on camera if he doesn't want that. But I'd like to call him. I'd like to tell him myself what his daughter just told me. I'd like to thank him for trusting me with something so precious with those 30 minutes when he gets to be a dad again. Steve stood up, his knees creaking slightly from kneeling in the aisle, and he addressed the entire studio now, his voice carrying to every corner, to every heart. I want everyone here to understand what we just heard, he said. This isn't about a game show. This isn't about points or prizes or making people laugh, though God knows we try. This is about a man who's dying, who can't hold his children or read them stories or be the dad he used to be, but who can still watch television with them, who can still laugh with his eyes, who can still be present in the only way his body allows. And for some reason I don't understand and don't deserve, our show gets to be part of that, gets to be the bridge between who he was and who he can still be. The audience was standing now, though no one had asked them to stand. It happened organically, people rising to their feet, not in applause but in solidarity, in recognition, in the kind of standing that happens when you know you're witnessing something that will change you, that you'll remember for the rest of your life and tell your own children about someday. Steve turned back to the cameras one more time. Thomas, your family came here today to thank me, but I'm the one who needs to say thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for letting me into your living room every night. Thank you for trusting me with something so important. Thank you for showing your children what courage looks like, what love looks like, what it means to keep showing up even when everything is hard. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. And I promise you on everything I hold sacred that as long as you're watching, I'm going to make sure every episode is worth your time. Every laugh, every moment, every second, I'm going to honor what you've given me by giving you the best show I possibly can. The studio erupted then, not in applause exactly, but in a sound that was part crying, part cheering, part collective release of emotion too big to contain. People were hugging strangers beside them, reaching across aisles to hold hands, creating webs of connection and solidarity that had everything to do with being human together and nothing to do with entertainment. And in the third row, 3 children sat with their mother, and they knew they understood in a way that transcended their years that their father had just been seen, that his suffering had been witnessed, that his love for them had been honored in front of the whole world, that he wasn't just a sick man in a living room, but a father whose courage and persistence and stubborn refusal to give up those 30 minutes of connection had just taught an entire studio what really matters. The cameras had stopped rolling for the scheduled taping, but they hadn't stopped recording. The director, a veteran of 25 years in television, had made a call. Let this play out. Whatever this was, it mattered more than the episode they'd planned to shoot. The studio lights remained on, but someone had dimmed them slightly, creating softer edges, gentler illumination that transformed the space into something that felt less like a television set and more like a sanctuary. Steve had asked Jennifer and the children to come down to the stage. They made their way carefully down the aisle, Sophia holding Jamie's hand, Marcus walking close to his mother's side, all of them moving as if in a dream, as if they couldn't quite believe this was real. When they reached the stage, Steve was waiting, and he knelt down again, this time gathering all 3 children into his arms, holding them with the kind of tenderness that transcends stranger and celebrity, that becomes simply one human recognizing the courage of 3 smaller humans who'd been asked to be braver than any children should have to be. "You're so strong," he whispered to them. His voice meant only for their ears, though the microphones caught it anyway. "All 3 of you. Do you know that? Do you know how strong you are?" Sophia shook her head against his shoulder. "We don't feel strong. We feel scared all the time." Steve pulled back slightly so he could see her face, and in his eyes was a kind of recognition that spoke of his own losses, his own moments of fear, his own understanding that strength and fear aren't opposites, they're companions, traveling together through the hard places. "Being scared doesn't mean you're not strong," he said. "Being strong means being scared and still getting up every morning, still going to school, still watching TV with your dad even when it hurts to see him like that, still loving him even though you know he stopped," seemed to reconsider his words, then continued more gently. "Even though things are hard, that's real strength, baby. That's the kind of courage most adults don't have." He turned to Jennifer, who was standing slightly apart, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her own pieces together. "And you," he said, standing to face her properly. "You're raising these babies alone while taking care of your husband. You're being nurse and mother and provider and the strong one who keeps everything together. Who takes care of you?" Jennifer's face crumpled at the question, not because it was unkind, but because it was exactly the right question, the one no one had thought to ask, the one she'd been too busy to ask herself. "I don't know," she whispered. "I just keep going, because I have to, because they need me, because Thomas needs me, because if I stop, if I let myself feel how tired I am, how scared I am, I might not be able to start again." Steve opened his arms, and Jennifer walked into them, and the embrace lasted long enough that it stopped being performance and became real comfort. A stranger holding another stranger's grief, because that's what we're supposed to do for each other, what we forget to do too often, what television rarely makes space for, but should. When they finally separated, Steve pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call him," he said. "Right now. If that's okay with you, if he's able to take a call, I'm going to talk to your husband." Jennifer nodded, her hands shaking as she pulled out her own phone and dialed the home care nurse who was with Thomas. The studio waited in breathless silence as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered the nurse, explaining that Thomas was awake, that he'd been watching, that he'd been crying, the ventilator allowed tears, even when it controlled breathing, that he was nodding yes, he wanted to talk. Steve took Jennifer's phone, put it on speaker, and held it up so Thomas could hear him clearly. The microphones in the studio picked up everything, the mechanical sound of the ventilator in the background, the quiet beep of medical equipment, the nurse's gentle voice saying, "Mr. Carter, Steve Harvey is on the phone for you." "Thomas," Steve said, and his voice carried across the distance between the studio and that living room in Detroit, bridging the impossible gap between entertainment and reality, between stranger and family. "Brother, I don't even know what to say to you. Your daughter she just told me something that broke my heart and put it back together at the same time." There was a sound from the phone, not words exactly, because Thomas couldn't form words anymore, but a sound that the nurse translated. "He's trying to say thank you." "No, sir," Steve said firmly. "I'm the one saying thank you. You've been inviting me into your home every night. You've been trusting me with your time, with your family's time, with those precious minutes when you get to be together and forget about everything else for a little while. That's a gift you've been giving me, and I didn't even know it." Another sound, this one longer, more urgent. The nurse spoke again. "He says you made him feel like himself again, like a person, not just a patient." Steve's eyes closed, and tears squeezed out from beneath his lids. His hand gripped the phone tighter, as if he could reach through it and touch this man he'd never met but who'd just become impossibly important to him. "Thomas, listen to me," Steve said. "You're a father. You're a husband. You're a man who worked with his hands and built things and raised these incredible children. The disease took your body, but it didn't take who you are. Your kids still see you. Jennifer still sees you. And I promise you on everything, that every night at 7 o'clock, I'm going to be there. I'm going to make you laugh. I'm going to give you and your family that time together. For as long as you need it, for as long as you're here, I'm going to show up for you." The sound that came through the phone then was unmistakable sobbing, muffled by the ventilator but real, raw, the sound of a man who'd been holding too much for too long finally being given permission to release it. The studio was silent except for that sound, Thomas crying 2,000 miles away, Steve crying in the studio, Jennifer and the children crying in each other's arms, the audience crying in their seats. It wasn't sad exactly, or maybe it was sad and beautiful simultaneously, the way life's most important moments usually are, painful and sacred and real in a way that transcends categorization. "Your babies are right here with me," Steve continued. "They're safe. They're brave. They love you so much it radiates off them like light. And they wanted you to know that watching TV with you isn't just what they do, it's what they treasure. Those 30 minutes are holy to them. You're holy to them." Steve handed the phone to Sophia, and she took it with trembling hands. "Hi, Daddy," she said, and her voice was small but clear. "We met Steve Harvey. We told him about you, and he knows now. He knows you're watching. He knows you're our dad. He knows we love you." Marcus took the phone next. "Dad, we're going to bring you a picture of us on the stage, and maybe Mr. Harvey will sign it, and we can put it by your bed so you can see it." Little Jamie, not fully understanding but knowing this was important, said simply, "I love you, Daddy. Come home soon." And the innocence of it, the childlike belief that maybe this trip, this conversation, this moment might somehow make his father well again, broke every remaining heart in that studio. Jennifer took the phone last. "Thomas, I love you. The kids love you. We're going to be home soon, and tonight at 7 o'clock, we're going to watch together just like always. Just like we'll keep doing for as long as we can." Steve took the phone again for one final word. "Brother, you rest now. You let these good people take care of you. And you know that you're not alone. You've got your family, and now you've got me too. We're family now, Thomas. That's what this is. Family." When the call ended, the silence in the studio was profound, not empty, but full, pregnant with understanding and grief and love, and the recognition that they'd all just been part of something that would outlive the taping, that would ripple outward in ways none of them could measure. Steve pulled the family close one more time, and they stood together on that stage under the soft lights, and for a moment, they weren't a celebrity and fans. They were just people who'd found each other in the midst of suffering, people who'd created connection where none had existed, people who'd reminded each other why we still gather, why we still tell stories, why we still believe in the possibility of grace appearing in the most unexpected places, the legacy it left behind. The episode aired on a Friday evening in November. The network had debated extensively this wasn't what they'd planned, wasn't the light entertainment audiences expected from Family Feud, but something in the raw footage told them this was bigger than format, bigger than expectations. They aired it almost exactly as it happened, with minimal editing, understanding that some moments lose their power when you try to polish them into something more comfortable. Within 12 hours, the clip had been viewed 90 million times. But numbers can never capture the real impact. They can't measure the father in Oregon who called his estranged daughter after watching, finally saying the words he'd been too proud to say for 5 years. They can't quantify the hospice nurses who showed the clip to dying patients and their families, helping them understand that being present doesn't require a functioning body, just a heart that still beats and eyes that still see. They can't count the people who called their loved ones that night just to say, "I love you." Suddenly aware that time isn't guaranteed, that every shared moment is precious, that we should never take for granted the simple gift of watching television together. Thomas Carter watched the episode from his bed in Detroit, surrounded by his family. Jennifer later said it was the most alert she'd seen him in months, his eyes tracking every moment, tears streaming down his face when Steve spoke directly to him, a kind of peace settling over his features when it ended, as if he'd been given something he desperately needed. The knowledge that his life mattered, that his fatherhood mattered, that those 30 minutes every night weren't just him passively watching, but actively being. He lived for 6 more weeks. 6 weeks of 7 o'clock rituals, of his children piling onto the couch beside his bed, of watching Steve Harvey, and knowing, really knowing, that somewhere out there, someone understood, someone saw, someone cared. Steve called twice a week, sometimes more. Not long conversations, Thomas couldn't sustain those, but brief check-ins, jokes shared through the nurses' translations, reminders that the promise hadn't been forgotten. And every episode, Steve would pause during the opening, look directly at the camera, and say something small. "This one's for you, Thomas," or "Hope you're watching, my friend." Messages that looked like throwaway comments to most viewers, but meant everything to one family in Detroit. When Thomas died on a Sunday morning in January, with his family surrounding him, and a Family Feud rerun playing quietly on the television because that's what Sophia had asked for, so Dad can hear something familiar. Steve Harvey was on a plane within hours. He came to the funeral, not with cameras or publicity, just came as a man honoring a friend he'd only spoken to through phones and screens, but who'd taught him something essential about what his work could mean, what entertainment could be when it transcended entertainment and became communion. At the service, Steve spoke about those 30 minutes, about how Thomas had reminded him that television isn't just about ratings or laughter or making people forget their problems. Sometimes it's about giving people a reason to gather, a reason to be together, a reason to keep going even when everything is hard. "Thomas Carter made me better at my job," Steve said, his voice steady despite the tears. "Because he showed me who I was really working for, not for networks or advertisers or even audiences, for families, for fathers who can't hold their children but can still laugh with them, for mothers holding everything together, for kids who just need their dad to still be their dad, even if the only way he can do that is by watching TV with them." The scholarship Steve established in Thomas's name supports families dealing with ALS, not just with medical costs, but with the small things that matter. Tablets, so patients can communicate, streaming services so families can watch shows together, adaptive equipment that allows connection when bodies fail. Because Thomas taught him that the small things aren't small at all. They're everything. Jennifer and the children still watch Family Feud every night at 7 o'clock. They've kept Thomas's bed in the living room. And sometimes they sit on it. And sometimes they just sit on the couch like they used to. And they watch Steve Harvey make people laugh. And they remember, not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with the particular ache of love that survives loss, that insists on continuity, that refuses to let go of rituals that kept them whole. And somewhere, in living rooms across the world, other families gather at 7 o'clock. Other fathers who can't speak still laugh with their eyes. Other mothers hold everything together for one more day. Other children learn that love isn't about perfect health or unlimited time. It's about showing up, being present, making 30 minutes sacred because you choose to make them sacred. Because television doesn't just entertain. Sometimes, when someone is brave enough to say, "We watch you with Dad every night," it reminds us that we're not alone in our living rooms, in our grief, in our stubborn insistence on finding joy even when joy seems impossible. Sometimes it becomes the thread that connects us stranger to stranger, family to family, dying fathers to 9-year-old daughters, brave enough to speak truth to power, and ask for nothing except recognition that their love matters, their time matters, their father matters. If this story touched your heart, don't just leave quietly. Tell us in the comments below. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Was it a word, a moment, or something it reminded you of in your own life? We read every single message because your stories keep this space alive. And if you believe the world still needs moments like this, hit subscribe, join our family, and help us keep remembering the stories that deserve to be told. This is Stories Left Behind, where human stories are never lost, and where your story might be the next one we tell.